Hello and welcome. What we have for you next is, who here has been to the Tricks of the Trade before? Yeah. So I could start this off with spewing some random facts, but there are 6 animators with me up on stage, so we're going to jump right into it, and I think you're going to find it more enjoyable because it's historically our top-rated talk of the animation boot camp, the Tricks of the Trade. We're starting with you.
Oh, be beautiful.
I told him I wasn't going to introduce him. I'm not just rude. This is Jake Clark.
Hey everybody, I'm Jake. I worked on Cuphead, and I'm now working on the upcoming Cuphead DLC. Most of my tips come from my traditional animation experience. They will be the most useful for the few traditional animators in the room, but that said, I'll try to make the tips useful for 3D animators as well. First tip, nail down your main poses as soon as you can. I had a lot of trouble with this robot before I started doing this. I wish I had my first attempts, but they were not worth keeping. I used to spend too much time in the rough stages of my animations, without finalizing any of the main poses until I had already done a lot of animating. But then sometimes I would find that because I hadn't fully fleshed out the major keys, I didn't notice serious problems, and I would often have to fix a lot of my animation, if not start over. So these days, I like to nail things down early, because it prevents some problems down the line, and it eliminates the uncertainty of whether my animation will work or not. I find the most stressful period of animating, especially on a deadline, is the time up until I know for sure that the animation is going to work. I know that once the poses are nailed down and they work, at the very least, I won't have to start over, and I can relax a little bit. Now, for 3D animators, I'd summarize this tip as focus on the poses before you focus on the motion, if you can work that way. I know some 3D animators will do things like animate the torso first throughout the whole animation and go from there. I'm way out of my element. Moving on. Next tip, consider the motion of each element of your character before animating between the poses. A good way to avoid problems down the line in your animation is to consider each part of your character in advance and not just jump into it and pray that things work out. For example, with this animation, I had to really think, how will this snake move? How will that snake move? How will that snake move? How will that snake move? And oh my God, there's another one too. Thinking about each part, I could make sure that everything moves together nicely and that there are no problems like 2 snakes moving together in the same way at the same time, the snakes awkwardly overlapping each other, things like that. If I didn't think ahead, I could have found that there were a lot of issues once I was already knee-deep in animating. The more you figure out before diving into animating, the better your animation will be because you're animating thoughtfully. For 3D folks, I recommend the same thing, having a plan for each piece of the character and thoughtfully placing everything according to that plan as you go along. If you don't, you may go from stepped to splined and see that some parts of the character move, good enough, and just keep it that way. The more intention you have, the better. Next tip, rough your poses light and push when tying down. I think I and many others have a subconscious tendency to hold things back just a little bit, even when we think that we're pushing them. So I often find, even to this day, my first attempt at a pose or drawing isn't quite pushed as far as it could be. Here's an example of a face that I roughed to show what I mean by this. After roughing, I went over it clean, but I pushed things just a little bit. You can see if you look closely. The eyebrows go down a tiny bit more in the middle, the corners of the mouth go just a bit higher, and the bottom of the mouth goes a little bit lower. And I find almost always when I do this, it tends to make things a little bit better and not a little bit worse. And for this tip for the 3D folks, I'd just say, after you pose something out, just try pushing things a little bit. You don't know it's too far until you try it, and unlike on paper, you can just undo. Sort of. Next tip, keep your animation sincere. I think it's much more important to keep your characters animating sincerely than it is to try to pack the animation with as much entertaining motion as possible. Here's an example from Princess Mononoke. The motions are pretty simple. Her head turns just a bit, her body subtly tenses as she spits the blood, then she adjusts her posture and wipes her mouth with a simple motion of her arm. She doesn't need to ham it up with a lot of extra movement because that would take you out of the story. You want people to believe in your characters as if they were real and see them as alive. You don't want people to be pulled from that illusion by too much purposeless movement. You want every movement to have purpose, not just to show off that you know how to overshoot things. In this example, nothing is superfluous. Simba closes his eyes because the weird monkey man is dropping some gunk on his head. He stretches out and wiggles his nose because he's preparing to sneeze, and he overshoots with his face because sneezing is a surprising burst of force and it causes your face to overshoot. It's important to make use of all of the animation principles that you can, just as long as they actually add to your animation and don't distract or go against what the animation needs to accomplish. Last tip, contrast. Contrast is one of the most important things, not only in animation, but in almost everything, and I think about it a lot when animating. If you have pose A start out fast and ease into pose B, and then you have pose B start out fast and ease into pose C, and C to D, it will be distractingly boring. It will put the audience into a coma on sight. It would be so boring. That's why I didn't make an example. I'm trying to protect you. In music, you need the contrast of high notes and low notes. In cooking, you need sweet and you need bitter. And so in animation, you need fast and slow movement, steady and erratic movement, big and small movement. Without any contrast, life would be very boring. Life needs contrast, and so does animation. That's it for me. Thanks, everybody.
Hello, everyone. I'm Sophie Evans. I'm an animator at the Molasses Flood, previously at Sony Santa Monica with Melissa. And today I'm going to be going over my personal animation philosophies. I'm going to be quickly going over the importance of workspace, some camera tips, and some lessons from yoga. Tip number 1, make your workspace work for you. When I say workspace, I'm talking about sitting ergonomically, making sure your wrists aren't straining, using scripts and hotkeys to automate as much as possible, that sort of thing. This is what Maya looks like the first time you open it up. You're presented with 8,000 tools to handle a billion possible tasks. So it's your job to curate and make sure you're being as efficient as possible with which tools you're using and how your tools are arranged. Seems pretty obvious, but you want to make sure you're set up for success before you even start animating. An efficient workspace is going to make you faster, which is going to make you a more valuable animator. As animators, we do a lot of repetitive operations throughout the day, so if you can cut a few seconds each time, that's going to save you a lot of time in that long term. We want to keep thinking about the long term and work smart more than hard. Our wrists are essential to our livelihoods, and RSI, carpal tunnel, these are real threats we need to be diligent about preventing, and we can do that with a proper workspace. And to that I say, consider switching to a tablet or a vertical mouse at least. Might feel weird or slow you down temporarily, but for me, it has sped up my workflow probably more than anything else. So if you can, give it a shot. I highly recommend it. As far as animation tools go, there's tons of great stuff out there, so I just wanted to highlight some scripts that I use a lot. I use a lot of stuff from Aaron Caressel, who's an animation tools lead at Pixar. On his site, he's got a bunch of stuff. If you work heavy in the graph editor, there's lots of scripts for flipping curves, pushing, pulling curves, making loops based on nearby keys. Really great stuff. If you work heavy in the graph editor, go to his site, check that out. There might be something there to speed up your workflow. Tip number 2, let's talk about cameras. I know we don't all have the ability to have animatable cameras in our games, but if you do, learning more about the features of a camera can help bring your animation to the next level. We all understand how important composition is, but do we understand focal length or depth of field? Learn these things. Just like composition, a focal length is going to evoke a certain feeling or mood. You want to make sure you're using the correct one that's going to emphasize what you're already trying to say in your shots. A shot's going to feel more dramatic or more intimate depending on a focal length. Every piece of the camera is a decision that we make. And by leaving the camera at default settings, that's a decision too, but somebody else has made it for you. So learn these pieces so that you can better make the decisions for yourself. And again, if you have the ability to have a camera, really take advantage of that and emphasize action with camera movement. This is a really early rough block-in of a camera sync move from God of War. You can see, especially when we remove the background elements, that Kratos doesn't actually move within the frame very much. So on a later pass, what I did was basically swung the camera left and right during the high action moments to put Kratos closer to the edges of the frame so that he takes up more space on the big movements. And you can see how that compares with the before and after. So really take advantage if you have the ability to have an animatable camera. Okay, tip number 3. What the heck does yoga have to do with animation? Well, one reason I love yoga so much is because the things you learn in a class are really applicable to all areas of your life. One thing you hear all the time in yoga class that I really love is go to the uncomfortable. And I know it's a little cheesy and we've heard it a lot, but we often gravitate towards the things that we're already good at. But we're not going to grow as much if we only do those things that we're comfortable with. So next time you're taking on an animation task, try to take on something that scares you a little bit or something that challenges you, maybe something you're not quite sure you can do. I think it's good for us to be in over our heads every once in a while. But you need to understand the difference between uncomfortable and painful. You want to go to the uncomfortable, but not to the painful. Find where that edge is for you and tread along that. We don't want to leave our comfort zone because we're afraid of failure, but don't forget, it's okay to fail. We've all done it lots of times. Failing is the best way to learn. Next time it happens to you, just be grateful you're given an opportunity to learn something. Something I like to think about is failure doesn't have to be the opposite of success. Failure can be a stepping stone on the way to success. So just to recap, take a look at your workspace, see if there's something you can do to make yourself just 2% more efficient. Learn the other pieces of a camera, and maybe take a yoga class every once in a while. Thank you.
Hello everyone, I'm Raul Ibarra, or Croissant on social networks, and I'm an animator at Moon Studios. I'm going to talk about a concept that I would like to call visceral animation. We have all been students, and we have all been fighting against the rig, trying to animate cool movements, get timing contrasts, and craft beautiful poses. We usually start by copying some references from movies or video games we like, and it's okay to do this. There is nothing wrong with that. And then, at some point, you feel confident enough to create your own stuff. Not only you start experimenting with your animation styles, but you also start ensuring the workflow you learned a long time ago. Start making a layout, do the blocking with your golden poses, define some breakdowns, go to spline, refine the animation, and do the final polishing. The problem is that many animators don't ask themselves if that is the right flow for them. The rules are necessary when you start, but also the rules are made to be broken when they limit your creativity. I always start an animation in spline. I polish some part of the character even before blocking others. I don't keyframe the whole rig in the same frame. I start an animation without knowing what the character is going to do. I even change my animation depending on the music I'm listening to. This may sound crazy, but it's how I work. I'm sure that there are a bunch of people that fit perfectly with the classic workflow, but I would like you to ask yourself if that workflow is the one that allows you to enter an animation trance. Here are some tips that help me in my animation process. Animating the hip of your character, forgetting the poses, is really helpful. I like to think that the character will be like a stain on the screen, so I don't really care about posing at the beginning of my animation process. And once you have the timing and the spacing defined, you will be able to work on posing. Moreover, if you imagine each limb of a character as a ball and the whole body as a stain or even as a fluid, it will be easy to define how to deform them to give more or less plasticity. Using the motion paths could be helpful to constrain the smear frames and body deformations. Deform, scale, move the bones, do whatever you need to get the best pose. There is no one inside that mesh, it's not gonna cry. When you have your animation almost done, try to break it with some crazy keyframes and you will probably discover pleasant surprises. This is especially interesting for overshoots and contacts, where introducing some noise could help a lot to get more believable actions. The last one, but the most important for me, is try to find the musical beat for your animations. We have the musical rhythm internalized, so let's use it to animate. No matter how bad you are playing an instrument, you have listened to music your whole life. If you look closely, every action has its own hit moments, some more obvious than others, but being aware of the musicality we want to give our animation will let us avoid boring timing. You can use your own voice, maybe record your hand playing a rhythm, or even follow a song beat to have a cool timing reference. At the end, we want to work on animations that thrill people. And as far as I'm concerned, animation is about enjoying the tempo. Thank you very much.
Hi everyone, I'm Sylvia Chong. I'm a lead artist at League of Geeks. Working at a small indie studio, I also juggle other roles as an animator, rigger, and character artist. My tips today will be about how getting a little technical will expand your toolset and can save you time without compromising on quality. It can be quite common for animators to overlook, tip number one, get comfortable with constraints. It can be quite common for animators to overlook or avoid using constraints in their workflow. It can seem complicated or cumbersome, but they're actually not as tricky as you might think and can be a powerful tool to add to your arsenal. Constraints can help you easily create overlaps, transfer motion from dynamic systems, optimize your workflow, utilize spline paths in geometry, stabilize movement in mocap, and more. So I encourage those who aren't comfortable with constraints to take a closer look and discover how they can make the most of them. Tip 2, block faster by breaking the rules. That's right, go ahead and animate the world control. Generally speaking, we never animate the world control. There might be some exceptions for locomotion, but it simply creates too much havoc. The curves of child controls can become difficult to edit and understand, but sometimes it just feels more intuitive to move and rotate the entire character when you're blocking, particularly for more complicated actions that involve spinning and flipping. So instead of avoiding the world control, I use a method where I try to leverage it, positioning it where it would be most useful. This position can change from pose to pose, but it's best to keep the keys stepped. When I'm done, I'll delete the animation from the control and use a constrain and bake workflow that lets me retain what I've keyed. In this clip, you can see I've changed the relative position of the world control to help me quickly rotate the character from the hips. Here I'm blocking out a swing, so I've moved the world control to the hand. This helps me rotate the entire character from this point, letting me quickly block out the gross motion just using a single control. I can then add more poses and easily adjust the timing of the swing as I iterate. When I'm done blocking, I use CG Monk's Lockinator tool to help me clean up. You can do this manually, but obviously the script makes it much quicker. So basically what the Lockinator does is create locators for every selected control, so you should select everything you've keyed in this step. Then it constrains and bakes the motion on the locators to record the animation. You can then delete the animation from the world control and recenter it. Then bake the recorded motion back to your rig. This is a non-destructive process which leaves your rig and animation intact and your world control centered and clean. It sounds a little complicated, but I'll show these steps again visually. So there are a couple important notes if you use this method. You need to bake the hip controls first to avoid broken results, and you should run an Euler filter on all curves after baking. This is the process in action. Apologies if this goes a little quick. So select the rig controls. The script generates locators for each one. The script constrains and bakes the animation to the corresponding locators. I select the world control and delete its keys. I select the hip controls, and the script bakes. This grabs the motion that was previously recorded on the locators and transfers it back. The remaining controls are then selected and baked at the same time. The final results is a clean scene with the stationary world control and the original animation rig intact. So the advantages of this workflow are it can speed up blocking, letting you iterate on more ideas. The world control can be repositioned anywhere you need it, giving you cleaner arcs and control over the center of a spin or flip. And it can reduce the amount of IK, FK switching you might have to do. Tip 3, speed up polishing by simulating secondary motion. If you haven't tried out simulating secondary motion, you should. It might not be for everybody or every style, but it can be a real time saver, so it's worth trying out. The results may not always be perfect or exactly what you intended, but it lays down a nice base, and from there it can be quicker to adjust than key it all by hand. And if your core animation needs to change for whatever reason, it's easy to resim. You can create your own dynamic setup or use one of many scripts available online. Some scripts you might want to check out are Overlapper, Physics Stool, and Magic Spring. So give it a go. You might find it saves you a bunch of time. So in summary, there isn't just one way of working. So keep experimenting and exploring. Go beyond your comfort zone. Don't be afraid to get a little technical. It only increases your understanding of the greater picture. Reflect on your process, pinpoint your bottlenecks, and see if there are better solutions. We work in an incredibly demanding industry. As I say, work smarter, not harder, and always stay curious. Thanks for your time.
Hi, I'm Zach, an indie developer from Toronto. Today, I want to share with you how my skills as an animator benefit from being exposed to multiple disciplines within a studio. I'll illustrate this, how it can be beneficial, and try to give you a few tips of how you can do the same. So I co-founded a company called Oddbird, where I focus on game design mostly, but I also do freelance animation at a company called Vertex Pop. So to best illustrate my point, I want to frame this as the area between where my design skills and my animation skills overlap. I'm going to use examples that have helped me, but I think this can apply to any discipline really. I want to start with how my design knowledge can improve my animation. So this is an example from Oddbird's currently unannounced project, and I want to frame it a little bit differently or explain how I did. The game revolves around these little fruit with big personalities, and there's 84 of them with 2 states each, meaning I needed to create 168 animations, and that just wasn't realistic with the time frame. So to tackle the quantity of animation I actually needed to produce, I thought of it as designing animations rather than just going for it. And this allowed me to develop a more creative solution. Instead of rigging each of them, I used a few empty game objects to create a setup that let me reuse animations for any character. I planned out which fruit would get what animations and ended up with 37 unique ones in the end. Out of these 37, some of them were specific, but most could be applied to any fruit. I made a few variations as well to add a little more personality. These were also animated directly in Unity, so if any other team members needed to edit them, they didn't have to open any software that they weren't familiar with. Another example can be found in how animation can be informed by the mechanics of the game. This is especially easy to do in characters cinematics or things like highlight intros, but collaborating with the designer will make your animations so much more effective in the game. This will also help give context to the game mechanics, and it's always better to show rather than to tell. Last year, Oddbird was working on a game called Super Random Heroes, and I created this intro cinematic for a mini-boss. The enemy does a jumping attack where he tries to land on the player, so I put that right in the cinematic. This gave a lot of context to the mini-boss and created an opportunity for players to feel smart for picking up on it. Now let's flip it. How can animation help my design skills? I want to use the principles of animation as an example. What perspective can they give to a design? Well, I consider things like, how much time am I giving the players to learn something? How do I anticipate a design beat in the game? Can I anticipate player progression? How can you use staging to draw attention throughout a level? Or what order am I presenting things? How many things am I requiring the player to mentally keep track of at once? This kind of thing is really useful to me since using it as a lens to see my own work differently allows me to ask myself questions that I wouldn't have otherwise thought of. Another interesting perspective that animation can give design is visual language. Games are interacting with a system that's behaving in a specific way, and at the end of the day, you're communicating an emotion or some kind of information without words. Designs can use words, but generally I think it's more engaging to not. I worked on both the level design and animation for Vertex Pop's new game Super Crush KO, and I needed to use my skills through both disciplines to communicate with the team to communicate the visual language of the game. I hope this gives you an idea of how you can learn from other perspectives or workflows to improve your own work. It can be a lens to critique or a basis for your approach for something entirely new. And the best part is, You can learn this from the people already around you. This can be coworkers, dev friends, or people that you just met on the street. So the problem is seeing something from another perspective can be unsettling at first. So I want to try and leave you with a couple tips of how you can do this on your own. Try asking someone, what do they consider before they start work? What principles do they follow as they work? And my personal favorite, what criteria do they use to measure the quality of their own work? And as a bonus, you might find a more creative solution to a problem you're having. Thank you.
Oh, okay. Hi, I'm Melissa Shim, and I'm currently a senior animator at Sony Santa Monica. I most recently worked on God of War and a lot of other things before that. So I'll be covering some tips and tricks about networking and job hunting, and I think they're applicable whether you're new to the industry or you've been doing this for a while. First off, I'd like to say that networking can be super awkward. However, if you're just starting out, over time, it'll get easier. While networking can also seem self-serving, I don't think it really has to be. We're all here to help each other out. So just be yourself and be genuine with your interactions. My first topic is etiquette. Provide a reason to connect. Part of networking is to reach out to as many people as possible. However, I don't necessarily think that quantity is better over quality. When I started networking, online specifically, I would usually contact an animator at a studio I was interested in and see if they had some time to answer some questions. I believe that striking up a conversation with the other person actually provides a more authentic and therefore useful connection. Keep in mind that not everyone will respond to you, nor are they obligated to. This is totally normal and nothing to take personally. Be professional. This is a pretty obvious one. If you're looking for information or for mentorship, showing gratitude with a please and thank you and respecting their time and space will go a long way, especially if that person has taken time out of their day to help you out. I also would love to advise against using Facebook as a way to connect with someone you've never spoken to or you've never met in person before. Honestly, you don't want someone like me to post a picture of you from 10 years ago doing drunk limbo, right, Simon? So if you're looking for a professional connection, please use these platforms instead. My second main topic is to know yourself and your audience. Have clear goals of what you want to accomplish and ask yourself if the move you're making is in the right direction or not. When deciding on a piece of work you want to do, choose something that really excites you. Your love for an idea will actually show more than you realize in your final product, and therefore make it stand out. Here's an example of a piece I did back in 2014. I didn't really create this to get a job at any specific studio, but I had a great admiration for work for games like this. And lo and behold, a year later, I ended up at Sony. Be self-aware of your work. And what I mean by this is to be honest and realistic about where the quality of your work stands. Compare your work to the goal studios you have in mind, as well as to other animators at your experience level. Find areas where you can improve, and if asking for feedback, point these out. Also, remember to be kind to yourself during this process. You can always aim for the stars, but be aware of what it'll take to get there. Do your research. Be familiar with the studio and the position you're interested in, the history of their games, their work culture, management style, and get as much detail as you can on the position you're applying for. As much as they're looking to see if you're a right fit for them, you want to ensure that they're a right fit for you. My final main topic is to always be learning. I learned how to do that in one night. So don't be afraid to ask for feedback, whether it's regarding personal animation, how you interviewed, or how you're performing at work. Constructive criticism is crucial for growth. For example, some years ago, I had done an animation test which I had not passed. The team was actually more than happy to provide me with some great feedback I could use going forward. Not all studios will be able to do this for you, but it's never, don't be afraid to ask, basically. Finally, Don't let failure get you down. It's often looked at as a negative thing, but there's so much that we can learn from it, and you really never know where it'll bring you. In 2013, my goal was to break into the visual effects industry by the end of the year, and that never actually happened. But with each job I took subsequently, it ended up bringing me to Sony Santa Monica, where I've worked on some of the most exciting and challenging animations of my career. So in conclusion, being respectful and polite, practicing self-awareness, and remaining open to growth will go a long way in maintaining a strong career. Thank you for your time.